Welcome to the show with your friend and mine. So tell me, Dr. Squee, who's it gonna be this time? We like to hear you talk, but we love to hear you listen. And if you are not subscribed, you won't know what you're missing. So welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Headphones up. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to the Halloween edition of the Dr. Squee Show. I'm here with somewhere behind me is my hellhound Willow. I think she's just in hiding at the moment. And we're here, of course, with Halloween. We wanted to give you something a little bit spooky. So I've arranged for the director and writer of the brand new horror film coming out on VOD on the 21st of November. This Do Not Disturb. It is a wonderful ride of a film, which sees a couple who are kind of, its relationships a little bit on the rocks. They decide to do a little peyote on a holiday, and things go slightly wrong when they start eating people. And if that doesn't entice you to watch the film, then I know a man who will. Please welcome to the Dr. Squee Show, the writer-director, John Ainsle. How are you doing today, John?
I'm good, thank you. And just to add to the VOD release, there's a November 17th. It'll be in select theaters in the United States.
That's the thing. I was going to elaborate on that as we got into it, just so no one in the UK tried to go out to the flicks to see it. But congratulations on the release, and you've been getting some absolutely wonderful reviews on this film. How's it been?
Yeah, it's been nice. I mean, it started here in Miami with Popcorn Frights, and at the same time, I think a week after that, we went to Fright Fest in the UK, and both festivals hit. It was well received, and the UK really seemed to jump on board with a lot of festivals and great acclaim. So something about the Python-esque humor in this film that appealed to the UK more than other places, it seems.
I could see that, because it is wonderfully scary, but there are just some lovely moments where it kind of like sideswipes you with the comedy as well, which was very well placed. But we'll get into that in just a second. Just for anyone who hasn't heard of the film before, other than my very quick explanation there, how do you kind of like describe it to people for the film?
Well, it's about a couple who head to Miami for their honeymoon. And while there and on copious amounts of narcotics, they come to the realization that their relationship is doomed. And she realizes that the only way out of this relationship is to eat her husband alive and be rid of him for good.
Now, if that doesn't entice you to buy a ticket or buy it on VOD, I don't know what will, people. But let's go into a little bit more. Let's tease them a bit. But according to IMDb, the script took 10 years from being written to make it to the cinema. Is that correct?
Approximately, yeah. I mean, in 2012, 2013, I was at what's called the Canadian Film Center. And I was there working on kind of a dramatic kind of film, and I wrote down, I was sitting in the middle of some kind of talk, and I don't remember which one, but I just, for whatever reason, wrote down the words cannibal sex fetish. And then I did some Googling on cannibal sex fetishism, which is a legit thing apparently. And then from there, I sort of turned that into a relationship movie. I wrote it a first draft quite quickly, but it was very tropey and very gory, leaning into the gore more than the relationship. But as I worked on it, I realized that cannibalism is sort of, in a relationship anyways, an allegory for the way when you're in a toxic relationship, you sort of eat the other person alive emotionally, as well as yourself. And so I used that and leaned into that and sort of came into what we have now.
That was certainly going to be one of my questions about it, because it seemed to be like it seemed like a very good parallel, as some of the best horror films do, to our lives and to our relationships. So that was a theme you purposely gone for, obviously. But was it something that you purposely kind of sort of like leaned into as you kind of wrote and rewrote it?
Yeah, I mean, there was some really weird stuff, and I sort of also borrowed from a lot of the, I'll say failed relationships, but really sort of my behavior in my 20s in relationships, and sort of, imagining how someone might not tolerate that. And so that was a big inspiration for Jack. And then Chloe sort of developed from there. My wife, who's also a producer on the project, also gave me a lot of great notes in terms of writing a female protagonist as well. So Yeah, I mean, you always sort of draw on your own life, but you may not know what you're drawing on until after. It's sort of post therapy to write for me, anyways.
It was interesting actually, kind of because there did seem sort of distinct energies, if you like, from the two leads. So Chloe seemed to be very kind of like very kinetic, very kind of like sort of not very peace with the relationship and the way
Right.
it was going. And then Jack seemed very kind of still and stayed, which then when you get into the more horror elements of it later on kind of really play well. Did you purposely kind of write it like that? Was that something you kind of found with the actors?
Yeah, I mean, in the writing stage early on, that was the big balance was, finding the right strength for Chloe because she couldn't be strong because otherwise if she was strong, she wouldn't have been in this relationship in the first place. And so it was a matter of knowing that she had this inner strength and sort of like giving her select moments where she had this inner strength, but for the most part, she tolerates Jack's abuse, which, the film itself is sort of cyclical in that I think it's the same scene that plays over and over, or same sequence of scenes where they enter the room, they talk, they argue, they decide to do something, and then they leave. And that happens, I think, 5 times over the film. And throughout the way she reacts each time is stronger and stronger and stronger until she builds up enough courage to end him. But yeah, that's simple. And that is very like, reminiscent of abusive relationships where people will tolerate the abuse until they can tolerate no more. So, and it's
And
cyclical.
oh god, yeah, yeah, that definitely kind of spoke from the film. But it's also something which I felt was a kind of quite strong theme from the beginning of it. Was there was a sort of like stark nature to it. You see this there's a shot right at the beginning where you're kind of going through traffic in LA, and it's kind of very kinetic, very active, and then you get to this hotel where it's just nothing, and it's just kind of like it's very stark. They see one couple to begin with, and the guy working the checkout, I believe. So with that, was there a was that partly due to the pandemic? I'm just looking at the timing of when it first came out last year.
No,
Was it always kind of, or was it always intended to be there?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the pandemic played a part, but I mean, that was always there. For me, the idea was, and originally it took place in Mexico, which is where the peyote trace originated from. And then it switched over to Majorca, where I was going to get money to shoot there, and then it became Miami because I moved here. But no, there's always this great mystery of what goes on behind dark doors or closed doors in hotels and apartment buildings. When you live in an apartment, you sort of, 3 feet from you on the other side of 2 sheets of drywall is a person's life, and you know nothing about this person and what they may or may not be doing. And you walk through the hallways, you can kind of overhear things, you can smell cooking, but you don't know anything about them. And you're sharing your air with them, you're sharing the water with them. And so that was always a theme, and especially in Miami, where Miami's just a fun city, as terms of the stuff you read in the news and all this fun stuff. But also, I remember as a child, I would come down to Florida from Canada, and you would you're watching Miami Vice and everyone's in a suit and there's cocaine and there's sexy women and there's sexy men and there's yachts and all this fun Miami neon. And then you drive down and your grandparents stay in Tampa or Sarasota, and it's just a bunch of retired old people, who are in bed by 9. So then you're like, what is going on? And then I think that taught me a lot about like reality versus perception as a child. And that's a fun thing to play with in movies always. I think this one plays with it a lot, but.
And it did seem like, it's almost like there was fun to be had around there, because there was obviously the beach there. There was obviously places and people who were having fun. And just this couple seemed not to be able to invest in it somehow. And I thought that played very nicely as well.
It's funny. Someone even pointed out to me that they're so incompatible that they can't even decide how they want their steaks
Yes.
together, which I didn't do on purpose, actually, but that was a good note. So.
Yeah, it's and I just like that kind of other than feel that because they're having such a bad time, they almost can't see the fun that could be around them that they're having on this honeymoon as well.
Well, and you sort of end up with, I think, because it was good because I had my cast were great to work with, and my cinematographer, we were all on the same page, and so things sort of happen. I think when that happens, you start working all together. And I remember on that theme was, in the script, he talks about he wants to go jet skiing, but she doesn't want to. And then just randomly, when we were filming that beach scene, there were some jet skis went by, and I just tapped Scott, the cinematographer, on the shoulder. I said, "Get those jet skis," and he went and he got that shot of the the couple in the jet skis. And then when I was editing, I saw this picture of Jack staring out into the water and thought, let's make him watch those jet skis because that's the vacation he wishes he was having. But instead, he's sitting on the beach being, chastised by his fiance or wife at the time. So that was just sort of, it just sort of worked, which I think a lot of things in this film sort of came together because everyone working on it was on the same page and got the story. So that was a great experience.
I mean, getting onto the look and the kind of like feel of the film, I do love the poster I'm just going to bring up now again, because it's kind of got a wonderful Hitchcockian kind of feel to the look of it, very kind of 70s vibe. Were there kind of influences like that? What kind of influences went in when you were writing this? Was there a certain feel of some of your favorite horror films you wanted to kind of include in there?
Yeah, I mean, the poster was designed by a company called Dog and Pony, and they're great. They also designed the poster for my first film, The Sublet, and I'm hoping they'll design all my posters because I really love their work. But yeah, writing it, I think the biggest influence, Polanski's always an influence on me, his earlier works, for some reason. I think it's because his ability, like in The Tenant and those kind of movies, to play with reality. But the biggest film for me was William Friedkin's Bug, with Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon, and that sort of intense relationship in a small hotel room where you don't know what reality is and you're not sure they know what reality is. And you see Ashley Judd's character go from knowing reality to not knowing anything by the end. And that was a big one for me. And then there's always the obvious. I mean, Tarantino is always, there's some throwaway shots that a homage to Tarantino in a very minor way. I mean, the way I shot that hallway behind them is almost the same as the way Jules and Vincent talk before they go in and have the flock of seagulls conversation. And then at the end, when she goes home in that T-shirt that says "I honeymooned in Vegas," and all I got was this T-shirt, is a throw out to also Pulp Fiction, where they end up in those T-shirts at the end of all the bloody mess. So I was in high school when Pulp Fiction came out, and I went to see it in the theater every night for a month. So it's, like it or not, it had an influence on me.
I think anyone of our age group, which I think we're somewhere in the same ballpark. That film was just huge. It was everywhere. Yeah.
It came out right at a time where I was getting into cinema. I was discovering Kubrick and Scorsese and Coppola and watching Apocalypse Now and these movies. And then that movie came out, and I remember it just blew my mind. And I didn't even want to see it, because I remember my friend saying, like, "Oh, come to this John Travolta movie." And I'm like, I don't know, 3 Men and a Baby. What are you talking about? But from the moment that the titles came on and that they changes the radio station and it ends up in I love that movie. So.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful. And one of the other scenes which I felt was a real, like, there's one scene which seems like the turn of the movie. So we kind of established this world that they're bickering and everything, and then you get the bit where they kind of like start manifesting their cannibalism. I love the kind of cuts and the kind of visions in that. Was that a difficult scene to film? Because you go from like there's just wonderful kind of cut between a mirror and water, which I don't want to give away too much, but it kind of just cuts between these different images just quite seamlessly. How was that to film?
Well, there's a few different sequences there, and they weren't as hard to film as they were difficult to explain to people what I was filming or wanted to film. That was the hard part because it's to introduce the narcotics. I didn't want to use these traditional sort of, effects, and I wanted to play with continuity and throwing the audience off intentionally, breaking the 180 rule, breaking continuity, so you'll see her come around the camera and she's wearing a different piece of wardrobe. If you notice in the background on one, the lamp is fallen over before we flash back, but you may not notice until you watch the movie twice. And then all the things with things appearing and disappearing and them switching sides of the camera, explaining that to people when you're filming, especially the continuity person who you're just, ruining their day in a large extent. But in a way, I was like, but continuity is the star of this scene. You should embrace this. But to that end, I'd shot a short film, like a proof of concept version,
right?
Which was a little different. I shot it with older actors, and it was an anniversary. Their kids they were empty nesters, and they were going to try peyote or ayahuasca. I can't remember which one the short was, but and then this sort of happens, and that was a little different because she just basically takes out her 30 years of married resentment by eating him alive, but it's the same result, but it was a little different. And then, so in that way, I got to practice moving the camera in that way and switching the turns, because this film has a lot of hard turns.
Yes.
You go from laughing to horrified to sort of heavy relationship drama in a matter of seconds in a couple scenes. Those were hard. Those were hard to make work in the edit, and hard to like visualize in my head, because you're shooting them not necessarily on the same day or at the same time, and matching energy and eye lines. And I'm not good at eye lines. So.
And had you given yourself any headaches with the kind of, because obviously as the writer and director, it's very easy, I could imagine, when you're writing to get carried away with kind of your vision, but then you've got to actually shoot it. Were there any kind of challenges like that?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's two. The first one was when her shadow talks to her.
Yep.
And I wrote that. I never once thought we would achieve that. I didn't think it was going to be in the film when we got that. But the day before we were shooting, Scott McIntyre, the DP, and I went and we got there's some awful pictures of me holding a lamp and some bad lighting, making failed attempts at it. And we kind of figured it out. And that one, I was surprised that it ended up in the film and worked. And we shot it old school. We shot it the way they would have done it in the 50s, where we just filmed her and then she's in that corner and we just literally sliced the image in half. And then we had her shoot her shadow part. It could not have been more simple. And the other part was the timeline, which didn't bother me quite as much as my first AD, Stephen, who was obsessed with making sure that this made sense over a 5-day period. And what happened on day 3 was continuous with what happened on day 3, and what they were wearing was correct, because, they changed their clothes, but we only see them experience, I think, 2 or 3 days, but 5 days go by and they sort of relive the 2 days. So he would every day, every brief moment, would hit me with this Excel sheet and scenes and timelines, and it drove me mental because there was no right answer. So, but I think he got it right. I mean, he said, he's like, I had to like call other ADs to figure out what's the title in the middle of it is the night before the night after the day you thought was yesterday.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No, I was fun. As someone who enjoys a time travel movie or two, I was right there with that one. I get that. That's my dream title card right there.
Yeah.
It was like, it's almost like it felt like a bit of time travel was just chucked into this kind of mad horror film at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, we played for days with the wording to that title. It was, and it's in the script. So it was worked out before we got to the end. So.
I did mention before about kind of like shooting around COVID times. So making any independent film is always kind of such a labor of love and so difficult to make manifest. But what were the extra challenges around kind of pandemic filming or post-pandemic?
Well, we sort of shot at a time where the pandemic was ending in the United States, and glimpses of the ending were happening in Canada, because we filmed the bulk of it in Canada, and when we filmed a few days in Miami on the beaches. So we like the inside of the hotel is in Northern Ontario, a town called Sault Ste. Marie, could not be further from Miami. And then all the exteriors are Miami. But yeah, we shot, and it was good because we were able to contain ourselves as a unit. The hotel was very gracious and amazing and gave us this banquet room turned into a large hotel room to film in. So we had a whole area for Video Village. We had, a room right next to it for my office and the effects office, and a room right next to that for wardrobe and makeup, and then a production office. So we had the first floor of this hotel for production on this little wing. And then the second floor, we had all our bedrooms. And we were able, I would wake up at 10 minutes before call time and go down and get free coffee in the lobby and then wander onto set. It was amazing in that regard. So once we sort of all got comfortable, COVID, we kept our masks on for the most part. We tried to, and we had tests every 3 days. And we did lose 4 hours on the last day of shooting to one of our crew members got COVID. So we had to shut down and make sure that more crew members didn't have COVID before we finished. And that sort of affected, there's a scene early on when they go over to Wayne and Wendy's room and party. And I think Kim ends up they all make out with each other. And the making out with each other sort of was modified drastically once the potential for COVID was there, because then that eliminated open mouth kissing. It eliminated, a lot more intimacy. So I had to really quickly refigure that scene out.
Yeah. And I mentioned before about the fact that this script was finished. Well, the first version of it was finished 10 years ago. Were there many changes in that time to adapt the script?
Not really. I mean, the first version I wrote of it was way too expensive to achieve for the kind of concept that this is. That's what I really found out. Originally, the way they got the peyote was by going out to this sort of Aztec Christian mixed church thing in the middle of Mexican desert, and there was a great thing, and then they ended up going back at the end. She ends up going back, and it was an homage to the movie Freaks, Todd Browning's Freaks from 1936. And she ends up becoming a disfigured chicken lady like that movie. But that was going to be impossible to, I needed a whole village of half-eaten people to really sell it. And that was just not in the budget. So then it changed to a Mexican wandering around the Mexican desert and finding peyote, which is actually how most tourists do find peyote. Or sorry, irresponsible tourists, because responsible tourists do take peyote all the time, and it's all great, and they take it with a shaman, and it's guided, and it's controlled, and they have wonderful experiences that are life-saving. But there are stories of, some pretty gnarly, some shockingly gnarly stories about. There's one about a German man who went there and just on his own harvested this specific type of peyote, and woke up the next day and eaten his arm down to the bone.
Right.
Yeah. There's some, you start Googling, this isn't pot and cocaine, fun drugs. You just don't mess around with it.
You see, so anyone who's listening on the radio who felt who was worried about us talking about drugs, we're showing the serious side of why you don't mess with this stuff.
Find a professional, find a shaman, or stay away. That's my advice.
Well, you too will be seeing chicken ladies parading in front of you.
Yeah.
Well, you see, I'm suddenly actually, now I say it, it's like, is this something to do with the Canadian obsession with chicken ladies? Because I used to watch Kids in the Hall.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's true, actually. Well, the end of Freaks, that chicken lady, that thing is just so bizarre to me. It's scarred in my brain. There's not a lot of movies that have scarred me, and that's one of them.
If that isn't in one of your future films, then I'll be very disappointed.
Yeah.
I want to see this chicken lady realized. Talking about the blood and gore of it, of course, as we are here at Halloween time. Yeah. What was that like to shoot? What do you have any favorite kind of gore moments, and how do you, how did you go about realizing those scenes?
Well, the neck slash was a fun one, and those are always fun, especially when you shoot wide the way I shoot. I love slasher movies, but I really, as a ex-cinematographer, it really perturbs me when I watch a movie and it cuts to a close-up of a neck or something slashing, and the exposure is all different and the angle's wrong, and it drives me nuts. So I try to shoot it as much as I can without those kind of extreme close-ups, which effects guys, it's terrible for their reel because you can't see what their work. But yeah, we shot it wide. We did shoot a close-up. I just didn't use it. And we shot it wide, which ended up being problematic because the actor, as one would reach up. And then he's hiding the blood gush, which is the cell. But then in the end, we did 2 takes because both Carlos, the effects guy, both of us were yelling, "Get your hand down." But him putting his hand up felt like a kind of a realistic human thing to do.
Yeah.
So I kept it. And then the other thing it did was it splashed the blood off his hand all over his face and then all over her face, better than just squirting out into the abyss would have done.
Right.
Yeah. So you can see her, she's got a lot of backsplat. He's covered, and because it's a lot, you run pipes a long way and you've got to have that pressure going, and it's got to be timed properly. And then if you're like us, I should say me, we shot wide and then we had to replace the carpet because it washes out unless you leave it there for more than 5 minutes, in which case your insurance company's getting a phone call and the hotel's getting a new carpet. So,
yeah, I did think it's like just the reset of anything you have to reshoot where you've got blood going everywhere. How long does it take to reset to kind of, prepare it for the next shot?
The arm pulling off took forever to reset because the way it's done, I mean, geez, I think we only did 2 takes, but I think we did 1 real take. But that is a really complicated thing for our budget level, because you had to build a false platform with a hole, and there's literally, I think, and Janet Porter, the actress, just posted it on her Instagram the other day if you want to track her down. But you can see the prosthetic body, which was the creepiest thing. And she would put her head up through a hole in the false floor and match the prosthetic body, which was molded after her body. And it was weird. Like, me and Kiara, the makeup girl, would move it at the end of the day, and it would be covered in blood, and there's like it's whole. And I remember my hand slipped and went inside, and there's guts in there, and it's fake. I mean, it's all silicone and whatever, but the mind that, and when we shot in Miami, if you ever been to Miami in the Rickenbacker Causeway, we shot her dropping all the body parts right underneath it, essentially. And my blood guy here, Antonio, he gave me this special blood that was awesome, and it just sat on the surface. Like, you'd put like a little cup and it would just create this pool, because it was oil, so it wouldn't sink. But it stopped traffic. Everyone is looking down to see what this pool of blood was. And then at the end of the day, I couldn't afford the arms, so I had to dive through the puddle of blood down to the bottom of the ocean, retrieve all these body parts, and then come back up. And it's literally not that dangerous. But in my head, I'm thinking of Jaws, and I can't get out of the water quick enough, and there's blood everywhere. It was not,
So you got to give yourself a little bit of a scare along the way.
The 9-year-old in me, who was terrified of Jaws, was awake and prevalent while I was under the water.
One thing I did love is it does feel like through the kind of techniques you use in the film, the way it's shot, of taking us into the kind of transformation, having it's like the kind of fast cuts really made you feel like you were trying to catch up with what was happening. How much of that was kind of found in the room? How much kind of in the edit? Because it seems like there's definitely some edit effects used in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's straight editing. It's that was pre-visualized quite early, because I wrote the song by Nero, and that remix by Delta Heavy was
a great soundtrack.
I wrote that scene to that song, and I wrote it and timed it out specifically for the time changes in that scene, because it builds the end of the club, it's party, she ends up in the bathroom, and they've got this natural sort of filter on it that's like Club Next Door type of bassiness to it that I use for in her bathroom. That's not an effect, that's in the mix. So, and then she goes underwater and it all works. And I did that with shots of the actors and random dance club footage, because we didn't shoot in a club. I mean, that's shot in Sault Ste. Marie with 8 extras at like 4 PM. So it's really interesting to make it look like a club in that way. And then the insert stuff was my DP got a DJ. He had shot a show earlier, and that DJ let us use club shots, so it was great. But yeah, I mean, that was fun. We got to we actually physically turned the camera upside down. That's not a post effect. And then I remember that was one of the first sequences I was cutting together while my editor Jordan was cutting the scenes, and we didn't really play or touch with it too much. It was kind of like I just kept dropping scenes in, and the edit just sort of, for the most part, worked. So it's kind of fun that way. But again, that came from writing it to that song. And then the hard part was getting the licenses for that song.
And I did want to talk also about the 2 leads in the film. So you got, I will apologize, I'll probably butcher her name, but Kimberly Leferreri.
Well, if you're speaking English, sure. Laferrière, if you're French.
I mean, English is the only one I've got to hand, I must admit.
Laferrière, if you're, I can't do the Parisian French for this Canadian French, because I'm not that good, but.
And Rogan Christopher, as I said before, there's kind of like a stillness to Jack's kind of character, and a kind of kinetic energy to close. Was that something they kind of just fell into? Was that something you had to kind of direct because it must be very hard for Jack to kind of like hold it all in, because as an actor you want to give as much as you can.
Well, they're both really talented actors. They both went to the New York neighborhood playhouse, so they came from a specific or a similar type of training and approach to the character. And then they worked on it a lot together without me, which I like. I like to feed them as much information as they need or want, and then they can take the character, it's theirs, and then I just On set, it's a lot of just me going over to Kim and asking her how it felt. And most of the time we were pretty much on the same page of it feeling good or bad or doing it again or not again. But for Jack, it was like, for Rogan found it, I mean, for him, it was a little more difficult in some regards because it's so because sometimes he would just deliver, especially when we got to Miami and hadn't acted in a couple of weeks on it. And I'd be like, you're not sympathetic. You're not a nice guy. You got to be a jerk. Don't respond. Like, the tone of your voice has to be negative and put her down and gaslight her. I mean, that's the difficult part, is remembering that, you know, if your fiance says she wants to start a yoga club, you're not supportive, you're just dismissive. So for him, learning that and learning, eventually at one point I said to him, you're a man child. And that clicked for him. And he went from there. And if you look at his acting, in a lot of ways, he's acting like a 6 or 7-year-old child. He's throwing tantrums. He's reacting quickly. He's not processing. He's not thinking. And even when they get stoned, he's literally he's treating her like his mother. The further down that rabbit hole he goes. So, and that was crafted and finessed a lot. So, yeah.
I mean, you really felt like he couldn't do anything for himself. Like, he kept on saying when he was doing the drugs, well, don't make me take these on my own, because he couldn't possibly conceive of doing something himself. She has to sort of handhold him through this.
That whole sequence I love, because he really wants to do the drugs. She doesn't. He finally talks her into it, and then finally she's like, fine, I'll do it. And he's like, well, I don't want to talk you into it. And then he wants to back out, and then she pushes him. And that whole conversation is really symbolic of of their relationship. That one, and when they come back from the party and she's mad, and he's like, well, you were dancing with him. And she's like, but that doesn't mean you can put your dick in her mouth. Like, but he doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to change the subject. So, yeah.
Okay, if we can minimize the
right,
later, just for the radio version, that's okay. We're perfectly spicy on the video version, but it just means extra editing for me, and this is got to go tomorrow. That's okay.
It's hard with this film.
No, I know. And by the way, just for anyone who's listening in Radio Land, obviously, especially for younger ears, if anyone's pushing you towards taking drugs, just like, you know, this film is actually a great example of why you do not go along with them. But definitely do not.
Someone, I can't remember who it is, but a critic wrote that this film does for drugs what Jaws did for the water.
I think that's actually a really great way of looking at it. And it's also, I think there is this thing, watching this as a man, I think it's very disturbing how much of yourself you see in the arguing, not in the kind of drugs or the cannibalism, or anyone gets the wrong impression. But yeah, when he is being so childish, it's like, oh yeah, I know I've done that in arguments before. I know I've taken that kind of tone when I know I'm completely wrong, which was, I think very well observed in there.
And I think when you're in a toxic relationship or a bad relationship, you argue those points even harder. The more wrong you are, the more you want to defend yourself in order to be right. And the more you do that, the worse it gets for yourself and for the person you're with. Yeah. And I think that's a really complicated thing that in relationships, I think it's a real struggle to get a handle on, that you don't have to be right. It's the situation has to be right. And that's a difficult thing to learn. And I've had a lot of 30-ish, 25 to 35-year-old men be like, I can't watch this thing with my fiance. She'll leave me.
It was sort of like, well, yeah, I'm in my mid-40s, so it's like, for me, it was kind of like looking back on that phase almost, and some past relationships. And I kind of like it when in a movie, especially if it's something like a horror movie, which, like, you know, obviously you can't identify being these horrible figures, but when you've got a little bit where you can identify with the figures, it kind of challenges you of like, oh, I do that, and that's the bad guy. Maybe I should be like just thinking about how I treat people in relationships.
Yeah, and a lot of that was with my wife giving me notes about like, well, she shouldn't do that. She should respond in this way and challenge him, and you know, and then examining like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have said that in my real life or this and that. And I did the same thing in the sublet as well with that relationship. A little different, a lot different, but there's moments in there where the gaslighting thing is really interesting.
Because your wife wasn't too much saying, it's like, yeah, you do this, that, and the other.
No, well, it was, you know, luckily she corrected what was left of me. But no, I mean, you know, humans we're not perfect.
Oh, that's certainly true.
But you only fail if you stop trying, is what people like to say.
And never true word spoken. Now you finished with this film, like this seems like one which would have been a wonderful training ground for kind of things you do in future films as well. Is there anything you particularly took from this film that you're going to take forward to your next project?
I mean, thematically, I always seem to write about relationships. But I don't know. I mean, I like to move on and try different things every time I do a movie. I've got a few scripts. I don't think any of them are very similar. This one was a unique way that I got to play a lot and do a lot of fun things. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I never know. I try not to know what I'm writing about until I've written it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I learned on this one is one, enjoy the process, because the process is the only joy that's guaranteed. Being on set and the camaraderie and building, even on a bad day, it's better than most days in life. And you know, like you never know. You can make a movie and it just gets completely ignored. So you can't wait for the success or the critical acclaim or the awards if they come or that. You got to enjoy making the movie and you got to make it for yourself. Otherwise, you may get nothing else.
And as a reminder to everyone, that's out on video on demand on the 21st of November. When did you say it was coming to its limited cinema release over there in the States?
November 17th in select theaters. I don't know which ones yet, but... And if you're in Miami...
Yep.
On October 30th, which I think this will be broadcast too late for that, but if you're in Miami October 30th, there's a free screening at the Cosford Cinema tonight on the October 30th.
So if you're watching this on the video version and you're in Miami, get there now. Yeah. Otherwise, sorry, a bit too late. And is there anywhere you'd point people towards where they can find out more information or look up any more of your work?
Instagram is always Instagram is probably my only social media at this point. It's Ainsle. At Instagram, there's also Do Not Disturb Movie, but there's like underscores between every word, so it's kind of complicated. So go to Ainsle and find out. Darkstar releasing Darkstar Pictures in the United States. They're putting it out in the States, so they'll be able to release it as well. And IMDb is always a good place.
And if you're looking up on Instagram, that's JAINSLIE.
That's right.
For anyone who's listening out in Radio Land. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really enjoyed the hell out of this film. I think it's wonderful and very inventive. I love the kind of cuts and the just playing with time is always a wonderful thing, I think, in film.
Thank you. We try to play with film.
And before I let you go, though, this is, of course, going out on the radio. Is there a song I can play for you? Ideally in the horror genre, but we can play anything you want. Or in the spooky Halloween genre. But
spooky? I don't know. That's a hard question. Right?
Or it can be from horror films, or it can just be whatever you want.
You play the Nero track. That Delta Heavy remix movie is...
Is that radio friendly before I agree to this?
That must be a feeling. Yeah, it must be a feeling is radio friendly.
Awesome. I'm just
double heavy remix because it was a free song, so
even better.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This has been a blast. Best of luck with everything else going forward with the film.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm in Dr. Squee. That was my show. In a world where you can be truly anything, please be kind.